Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life of a truly foundational hero in Islamic history, Bilal ibn Rabah. We're talking about a towering figure here, guys. He isn't just a religious icon. He's this universal symbol of human rights, incredible resilience, and the absolute relentless fight against oppression. But right off the bat, we have this profound mystery that we're going to unravel today. You see, Bilal was famously handpicked by the Prophet Muhammad himself to be the very first Muezzin, the person who actually makes the call to prayer. His voice was legendary. And yet, after decades of just absolute unwavering dedication, Bilal completely silenced that iconic voice. He simply refused to ever make the call to prayer again. So think about that for a second. Why would a man whose entire identity was so deeply intertwined with this sacred duty just suddenly stop? Let's get into Section 1, the man behind the voice. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Born around 580 CE in Mecca, Bilal was of Habashi or Ethiopian descent. And he started his life in incredibly difficult circumstances. He was marginalized and enslaved in a deeply, deeply hierarchical society. But as you'll see, his story definitely didn't end there. From facing unimaginable physical torture for his beliefs, to being liberated by Abu Bakr, and ultimately rising to profound prominence as the First Muezzin, Bilal's life is honestly a masterclass in overcoming systemic oppression. He passed away in 640 CE in Damascus, but the journey between those dates, it literally changed history. Now, looking at some really fascinating academic analysis from the First Journal of Theology, it's clear that Bilal's physical liberation by Abu Bakr wasn't just some simple transaction. It was a monumental, earth-shattering shift for that society. It demonstrated a core tenet of this new faith, absolute equality before God, completely regardless of race, ethnicity, or prior social status. His freedom was essentially the ultimate physical manifestation of justice. But before that freedom came some truly horrific suffering. When his enslavers found out about his new monotheistic beliefs, they subjected Bilal to cruel, agonizing physical torture. They would literally pin him down in the scorching desert sand under a massive rock, demanding that he renounce his faith. And his response? It was this defiant, unyielding chant, Ahad, Ahad, which means one, referring to the oneness of God. This simple two-word phrase became the absolute ultimate symbol of spiritual resistance. They could crush his body under a boulder, but they absolutely could not touch his mind or his spirit. Moving on to Section 2, Islamic Liberation Theology Explained. To really grasp Bilal's impact, we kind of have to contrast two completely different worldviews. On one hand, you have the pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah society. This was a world heavily rooted in tribalism, severe racial discrimination, and the brutal exploitation of the poor through slavery. But on the flip side, you have the Islamic liberation principles that Bilal championed, which emphasized the absolute equality of all believers, social justice, and fair treatment. So Bilal wasn't just adopting a new theology, right? He was taking on a revolutionary framework that fundamentally dismantled the discriminatory world he was born into. Central to all of this is a crucial concept, Amar Ma'ruf Nahi Munkar. It basically means advocating for the good and forbidding the bad. The big takeaway here is that in this framework, resisting oppression, just like Bilal did under that rock in the desert, isn't just some political statement. It's actually considered a profound form of worship and a collective moral responsibility. You just cannot separate the spiritual faith from the demand for human rights. They're a package deal. All right, let's look at Section 3, 6 Indicators of Freedom. Take a look at how perfectly Bilal's journey actually maps onto universal human rights. For freedom of religion and opinion, we see a man who maintained his voluntary belief and boldly spoke his truth, despite agonizing torture. Then, in terms of individual and economic independence, he literally went from being legally categorized as property to a free individual with the right to his own life and honor. And finally, freedom from oppression and freedom in education. Bilal actively fought systemic injustices and became this key figure in spreading egalitarian teachings. He lived the transition from total subjugation to multifaceted freedom, for sure. Which brings us to Section 4, the silenced caller. So, back to our big mystery from the beginning. The answer actually lies in his remarkably deep personal bond with the Prophet Muhammad. Their closeness was beautifully symbolized by this daily ritual they had. Bilal held this special spear, which was a gift from King Najashi, and before every single one of the 5 daily prayers, he would personally seek the Prophet's permission before calling the Adhan. That means at least 5 times a day, every single day, their lives intertwined. The Prophet would tell him, "Comfort us with it, O Bilal." Their relationship was anchored in just immense love and mutual respect. Which brings us to, honestly, a devastating turning point. When the Prophet Muhammad passed away, the grief that swept through the community was paralyzing. But for Bilal, it was completely insurmountable. When the time for prayer came, for the first time in years, he couldn't go ask his beloved friend for permission. He stood up to make the call, but when he reached the part of the Adhan that says, "I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of God," he broke down. He simply couldn't recite the Prophet's name without weeping uncontrollably. Heartbroken, he went to Abu Bakr and said, "Ya Abu Bakr, I cannot call out the Adhan anymore." His silence was just a product of pure, overwhelming grief. Bilal couldn't even bear to stay in the city of Medina anymore because literally every corner reminded him of his loss. So he left for Syria to escape those constant painful memories, and he would only call the Adhan one single time after that, years later, in the 15th year of the Hijra, at the special request of Omar. When that legendary voice echoed through the air one last time, historical accounts say it brought the entire community to absolute tears, remembering the days when the Prophet was still with them. Imagine how powerful that moment must have been. And finally, Section 5, Bilal's enduring legacy. Fast forward to the end of his life in Damascus. As he lay on his deathbed, his wife Hind was understandably weeping and crying out in grief. But Bilal, he actually smiled and replied, "Washa taraba," which means, "What a great joy." I think this brilliantly illustrates exactly who Bilal was. He wasn't fearing death at all. He was overjoyed because, in his mind, tomorrow he'd finally be reunited with his loved ones, the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. His ultimate freedom was calling him home. When you look at the academic analysis, it's so clear that Bilal ibn Rabah transcends his physical life. He isn't just some character in a history book. He stands as this unbreakable, eternal symbol of universal human rights. By overcoming the intense racial discrimination and brutal slavery of his time, he proved that true honor is found in character, piety, and resilience. He remains a global icon for spiritual, intellectual, and social liberation. He reminds us that the fight against oppression is a timeless, sacred duty. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. We've seen how Bilal fought harder than anyone for his freedom. And yet, the man who found his ultimate liberation ultimately chose silence out of pure, devoted love. So, what does that teach us about the true cost and the true meaning of liberation? It's a pretty powerful reminder that our freedoms are deeply intertwined with our humanity, our connections, and our love for one another. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive into Bilal's life leaves you inspired to value both your freedom and the people you share it with.